friends, and welcome back to We're Already Here, a podcast bringing you tools by and for everyday people on how to show up better for yourself and others, how to be smarter and stronger in the face of hardship, and really soak in the highs without angst from the past or fear of the future. Today, I am here with Meghan. Meghan is a counselor in training. She attends grad school full time. And in her free time, Meghan reads a lot of fiction books, knits or crochets, and likes to hang out with her friends. Meghan was a music teacher for 6 years before going back to school for clinical mental health counseling. She made 2 cross-country moves from upstate New York to Northern California, then from California to Charlotte before settling in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she is right now. So today I am so excited for our discussion. It is just the perfect "we're already here" topic. We're here to talk about one of the most important skills that we can possibly gain in our lives, and probably the number one thing we need to feel happy and content through our lifetimes, but is something that we're never taught. And that is reducing your emotional reactivity, general emotional intelligence, and distancing yourself from your thoughts. Meghan and I are actively practicing these skills. And in this season of my life, which we might talk about a little bit in the episode, maybe not, I am really actively learning a lot of these things from her. And I feel like everyone can learn or at least relate to mine and Meghan's journey here. Before we start, I just want to put a disclaimer that we are not licensed therapists or professionals. At this time, we are just people practicing the skills, students of the practice, and sharing our practice with you all. So, Meghan, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I want to start with a quote from Susan David, who is an expert in emotional agility. And it says, "Between stimulus and response is a space. And within that space is the power to choose. And in that choice lies our growth and freedom." So we don't always choose what happens to us. In fact, we rarely do, but how we react to the things that happen to us is up to us. Emotions are data, they're information and not direction. So that is kind of the overlay for this conversation. Meghan, tell us about yourself and your journey on learning these skills.
Yeah. So about a year and a half ago, I was absolutely miserable. I was miserable with the person I was dating, and I was miserable at my job. So I, like everyone, wanted so badly just to be happy. And I really took a step back and I looked at my life and evaluated all the things that were not making me happy and made some serious changes. So one of the things I did was I broke up off the 3-year relationship I was in, and I decided to apply for grad school. I put
Big
myself,
changes all at
yeah,
once.
I kind of was like, I took a look at my life and was like, this is not it. What do I
I'm
want?
just going to change all of it.
Yeah. So I put myself in therapy and decided I really needed to take a look at the patterns I was creating in my life. And when I ended that relationship, I had a lot of work to do on building myself, building back all the that was I felt stripped from me. Um, I knew that something I was passionate about was mental health, and decided I wanted to become a counselor myself. So I started therapy in November 2021, and I met my now fiance a month later from then. And in the matter of months, everything really started to change for me. I was accepted to the graduate program for clinical mental health counseling um, at Winthrop, and I changed up my eating habits and worked with a nutritionist, and I had lost 21 pounds, and I had completely fallen in love and am in the healthiest relationship I have ever known. So
We love that.
my fiance made it possible for me to quit my job and focus on my degree full time, which did take a lot for me to accept at first, because I've always worked for everything that I have. But being a part of the program is like kind of being in therapy a little bit in itself.
Your grad school program.
Yeah, being in my master's program. There is so much I've learned about myself during this first year. It was it was like paper after paper, writing and reflecting on my personality, the way that I handled things, a lot of like inner child work, what happened in our childhood and how that affects us now, while
Mm-hmm.
also learning counseling theories and skills. And I started to learn about ACT therapy, love ACT therapy, and I learned about that in
Yes, we actually
counseling
talk
too.
a lot about CBT on this podcast because that's what I'm
Mhm.
like most familiar with. So actually, when we were just doing like all the prep for this, and you saw act therapy, I'm like, I've seen that before, but I never really knew what it was.
I'm I just fell in love with it. I'm really excited to talk about it today. ACT therapy is acceptance and commitment theory.
Mm-hmm.
It is based on evaluating how psychologically rigid or flexible you are as a person. And I
Mm-hmm.
totally thought of myself as easygoing and flexible, but it turns out I was completely wrong.
So what does that mean? Like rigid versus flexible?
A lot of it I relate to control. Like
Mm-hmm.
I felt there were kinks in my hose, as we call them, and I didn't realize how much control I needed over the things in my life. I needed control over my thoughts, my feelings, and my
Mm-hmm.
experiences. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to prevent future unwanted experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I was having a lot of trouble sleeping a few months ago, and I was like, everything in my day was thinking about how I could sleep better at night. I have to go on a
Mm.
walk. I have to eat. I have to drink. All the things, like
Yeah,
just to make sure I avoid like that experience of not being able to fall asleep or getting anxious about
got
it.
it. So is
Yeah.
that rigid? Is that like the need for control over all of these elements in your life? That's a
Yes.
rigid type.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then flexible.
Flexible. Yeah. Psychologically
Okay.
flexible. So more accepting of your feelings and things, and just like letting
Like
things
rolling
flow.
with the punches, letting
Mm-hmm.
things roll off your back, letting go of what you can't control, that type of thing.
I felt like the only reason I was so go with the flow as a person was to control how people felt about me.
Mm,
So a lot of people are like, yeah, I like to do whatever you want to do, but it kind of is like, just I'm a people pleaser with like a deep need to be liked. So basically, that class in this master's program jump started my way into being just like more present and mindful and becoming more psychologically flexible and learning to control less and let go.
yeah, I feel like so many of us are like people pleasers undercover. And it really comes from like a distorted sense of self. I remember I made a very intentional switch in my brain at some point, like midway through college. And I feel very fortunate that this happened so early for me. But it was a moment of, all right, if I need to be a certain way for people to like me, then they are simply not my people. And it seems so basic and it seems so easy, but it's really not. Like we have an evolutionary need to be liked because humans are social creatures. That was our power. That's why we survived evolution, was because we were able to empathize with another, and like being ostracized basically meant that you were dead. And like we are functioning in a modern day with a brain that's 200 million years old. So like these things do feel like life and death, but now
Well,
it's not life and death.
shame is like a really driving power
Mm,
of like we want to avoid feeling shame, and
mhm.
that is also being a little bit more like psychologically rigid, where you're again you're trying to control. I did not know how much control like humans really wanted and needed over things until I really sat and thought about it. It seems obvious, but like
Mhm.
it's not.
I mean, that's something that we talked about a lot too. Having the sense of knowing is so comforting in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like this is familiar, this is comfortable. I'm just gonna stay here because that's scary. I don't know what's gonna happen over there.
Mhm.
Absolutely. That's something we all, I think, have done.
Yeah. And that's something I'm practicing my meditations now. Like I do a lot of, I meditate every day, and I find myself searching for meditations that are like being comfortable with the unknown, being comfortable with uncertainty. And like when I was younger, I was so good at that. I was so good at like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to set myself up for success. And I feel like now as I've gotten older, it's funny. It's like worked in reverse. Like I am much less comfortable with uncertainty. Like I like what I like, and
Hmm.
I don't want to not know. So what does this idea of you are not your thoughts mean to you?
To me, this is something that also sounded very obvious at first until it like
Mhm.
really sunk in, until I really thought about it. But basically, you are a separate person from your thoughts. And Eckhart Tolle taught us that by saying the phrase, I can't stand to live with myself, where there's like an I that can't stand the me, that there must be two of me. And I thought that
Mhm.
idea was really cool. We called this like waking up our witness, or we call that our observing self. And
Okay.
our observing self witnesses our thoughts as opposed to thinking we are our thoughts.
Mhm.
And many of us have a lot of trouble because we are fused to our thoughts. If we can find a way to diffuse from our thoughts, we can start to judge ourselves less for having the thoughts to begin with and make room for those thoughts and feelings. And that's called diffusion and expansion. And that's another
Mhm.
reason why I like meditation so much, because it really taught me how to like speak
Totally.
kinder to myself. Just like, oh, if you find yourself wandering, gently bring yourself back to your breathing.
Yes.
It's like, so, oh, that's so kind. And why can't we speak to ourselves more kind like that when we're having thoughts?
I'm 100% with you. So I started meditating a handful of years ago, but really took it into practice about when COVID started. Um but I totally agree, that was such an awakening moment for me when they were like, if your thought wanders, don't judge yourself. You're not bad at meditation. Just bring yourself back. And I was like, we can do that. Like we can just fix it and not like shit on ourselves. Like, oh my
Oh,
God.
we don't have to be perfect.
Right.
Yeah, like go
I
figure.
know. Yeah. And I
And that's why a lot of
love,
people won't, oh, I'm bad at meditation. But if you just sat through it and like practice, everyone thinks they have to just be good at something right away.
yeah,
I really like how it taught me to talk to myself.
absolutely. I didn't even the idea that we are separate from our thoughts did not even occur to me until I started meditating. My first like introduction to meditation was Headspace, and one of the first free sessions they had, and this was back in like 2018, so it might not be there anymore, but it was talking about watching your thoughts like you're watching traffic. So
Mhm.
letting them go by and not letting any of them take you away. Or in a recent meditation I did, it was like just labeling it. So if I am starting to get pulled by a thought about um just anything that's stressing me out, labeling it like, oh, I'm having a thought about work, and like just not letting it take you away, which is so hard. Like I
Yeah.
find there's never a meditation where I don't get down the rabbit hole of my thoughts until the guide comes back and is like, and if you distracted yourself, come back to the breath.
Yeah, I've heard about the traffic. There's also like putting your thoughts like on a leaf, and it like the leaf is floating down a stream.
Oh,
That's a good
okay.
one, where it's like it's coming in, it's floating by, and then you let it go. Or a therapist I had in the past said taking like all your thoughts and like labeling a room or a house and then like leaving the house.
Mm.
Oh, interesting. Like I can still go back in the house later, but like right now I'm gonna shut the door and like do something else.
My therapist and I talked about setting a grief timer where it's like, okay, there's like one thing I'm very proud of for myself is I'm so good at not avoiding my emotions. Like I'm so good on really feeling those, just not shying away from feeling terrible, because I know that your capacity for the lows is your capacity for the highs. Like you need both to be fully alive. So I can
Mhm.
totally appreciate that, and I can totally be in there and feeling awful. But some days I was just like not a functioning human being, could not do anything else. So my therapist and I talked about setting a grief timer where I have 15 minutes to just
Mhm.
let it all out, and then we have to put it in the box and put it away and come back to it later.
It's so cool how we can just like say things to ourselves, and it's just the way that our brain takes it and process it in a different way. And like, okay, yeah, I can shut the door, I can put it in a box, or I have
Mhm.
this amount of time, and it just like does something to our brain and the way
Yeah.
that we like feel and think. And then we can get up and walk away. It's so cool.
It is cool. And Susan
Mhm.
David talks about this a lot. Your emotions are data. They are guides, they are information, but they're not the directions. So like you can't let your emotions drive, but they can guide your directions, which I thought I was good at until I hit rock bottom. And like let me tell you, I am not good at it when I'm not doing well. But like when I'm content in life. I'm like, absolutely, information. But like when you're really going through it, it is so hard to not let your emotions just completely take over. So let's go back to this idea that you're talking about called diffusion and expansion,
Mhm.
where we diffuse from our thoughts. Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah. For this, like, I'm wondering if you'd be willing for me to practice doing this with you.
I am ready and willing.
Okay, great, good. And anyone else can do this while while they're listening as well.
I encourage it.
Yeah, actually, yeah, actually doing it instead of just like thinking about doing it will really help you. So if you want to take out like a piece of paper and a pen and write down,
Let's do this.
yeah, take a second and think about a difficult thought or emotion that you're having. An
Um,
example. Oh, okay, yeah.
like a specific thought or like I am nervous.
I would say like I am anxious, I am lonely, or you could say I'm feeling depressed. I think of
Okay.
this is a thought that you're fused to. I am anxious, you know.
Okay.
It could even be like one of the biggest thoughts that you were having while you were going through your breakup.
Okay. I think I know my thought. So
Okay.
do I write it down?
Yeah. Write down what your thought was.
Okay, written
All
down.
right. So now that you have your thought written down, take a look at what you wrote on the page and like ask yourself, how does that make you feel? Like just looking at that thought.
Okay. Should I share it or should I not share it until the end?
Yeah, you can definitely share it.
Okay. So I wrote I am afraid of uncertainty.
Hmm.
Okay. It makes me feel weaker.
Yeah. So like not only do you have this thought, but again, you're judging the thought and you're judging
Mhm.
yourself because you are the thought essentially, right? I am
Mhm.
afraid. I'm afraid of the uncertainty of the future. Yeah. When we have these thoughts, we typically find ourselves trying to resist them. Like we don't want to feel this and we
Mhm.
push them away. So having this thought is much like holding like a pillow in front of your face and it's like it's suffocating you. You are this thought, you're fused. So
Mhm.
that's what we call fusion, infused
Okay.
thought. Now, underneath what you wrote, I want you to rewrite the sentence essentially, but you're going to write, I am having the thought that, and then rewrite your sentence. So if you said, I'm anxious, you're going to now write, I'm having the thought that I'm anxious, and finish the sentence with what you previously wrote.
Mhm. Okay.
So now you've rewritten the sentence, now read it out loud.
I am having the thought that I am afraid of uncertainty.
Yeah. So now that's kind of like taking that pillow that was like right in front of your face and just giving it a little breathing room. It's taking the thought and you're separating it a little bit from yourself. You're
It
saying,
also feels better to read out loud. I wasn't expecting this to happen. I was kind of like, oh, yeah, I'll like go through the motions. But actually reading the first one out loud and the second one out loud, like the second one made me feel like I returned a little bit of power to myself. You know what I'm saying?
reread it out loud.
I am having the thought that I am afraid of uncertainty.
So that's called reframing. And so you just reframed that thought. Instead of I am, it's I'm having this thought. And
Hmm.
it's just a thought. And it gives it less power as well.
Yeah.
Reframing this thought helps us perceive it just a bit differently. Again, like I don't know the exact science, but it's just like the chemical, the
Hmm.
something happens in our brain that just makes it different.
Yeah. It feels different.
Now I want you to rewrite it again, but this time you're going to say, I noticed that I am having the thought that I am anxious, or whatever you wrote at home, or whatever you
Hmm.
wrote, right? So now instead of I am anxious, then it became I'm having the thought that I'm anxious. And then it's I noticed that I'm having the thought that I'm anxious.
Okay. I
Yeah.
noticed that I am having the thought that I am afraid of uncertainty.
And what now you've done is you've separated yourself twice from that thought.
Mm.
So how does that feel reading that now?
Yeah, I that feels even less emotionally charged than the last one.
So this is an exercise or activity to help us diffuse ourselves from a certain thought that we are fused with and we just can't let go. So it
Mm-hmm.
could be any thought that's like really bothering you, and actually going through like the motions of writing it down, really like just seeing it as a separate thing from yourself. Because when it's in your head, you're like, it is me, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, as an extension to this exercise, now I want you to take the paper and hold it with both hands.
Okay.
You know, a lot of us might think, I'm feeling anxious and we want this, we don't want that feeling, so we are resisting it. So now, like, to represent that, we're going to take the paper and hold it at arm's length. And if you were to continue resisting this by holding it at arm's length, after a while you're really going to feel like, you probably feel yourself, like the tension in your arms, and it takes
Yeah.
more and more effort as time goes on to resist the thought.
Mm.
But now instead, try taking the piece of paper and placing it in your lap. And now you can notice my hands are free to do other things, but the thought
Yeah.
is still with us. And
Uh-huh.
you can even take this piece of paper, if you wanted to like fold it in your pocket. You are allowing that thought to be with you. The thought is actually closer to you now than it was at arm's length.
Mm-hmm. But it's in a more comfortable place.
But now your hands are free to, and your mind is free to do other things, all while allowing that thought to happen and be there. This exercise really helps us with expansion, which is just making room for the thought or feeling or sensation that we're having. And that is just going to help us accept that I'm having this thought. Okay, like, I see it, giving it less power by diffusing, separating ourselves from our thought, and just accepting like that. Okay, I can have this thought. Like, I don't need,
Yeah.
that's just,
Yeah.
that's called diffusion and then expansion. It's all
The
about accepting.
the acceptance feels huge for sure.
Yeah, do you want to
Um,
talk a little bit more about like how you feel after that?
yeah, I feel like it makes you, I said the analogy earlier of your emotions can come along for the ride, but you can't let them drive. Like this felt like the action of taking my emotion and putting it into the passenger seat and then putting it into the back seat. You know what I'm saying? Like I felt
Mm-hmm.
like the first one, it felt charged. It felt like that was my emotions taking the wheel. The next one where it was I'm having the thought, that felt like, all right, we're moving you to the side. And then I notice I am having the thought is like putting it in the back seat. So that it felt like increasingly more
Distance.
feelings of in control. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So that's just
Awesome.
something you can do anytime like you're really just fused with a thought and you can't let it go and you're trying so hard to resist it. You shouldn't
Mhm.
really resist it. You should allow it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just recognize that it's not you, it's just a thought that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
And those thoughts change all the time. Like I was thinking about this a lot. Sometimes you feel like you have the same situation, and the way, at least me, the way I feel about a situation can change literally in a matter of minutes. So I feel like I can have the same situation presented in front of me, and it could be even something as like objective as my job. I love my job. I hate my job. I work so many hours. I'm exhausted by my job. My job's really fulfilling, you know? And it's like all of those things are like true, you know, or not true. All those things are completely like neutral statements. And at
Mm-hmm.
any moment, any one of them can feel true. That always puts it into perspective for me.
I mean, how many times have you felt angry, maybe at somebody, and you're like, I could just really, I don't know, like you want to scream at them or something, and you're having that thought of like, I want to react and I want to like punch them in the face or whatever you want to do. But then later on, like after you calm down, you're like, that's not necessarily true. You know,
Yeah.
it's just a thought in a moment of time. And we all have like very intrusive or like thoughts that come along too that aren't necessarily true. Just because you thought it doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, totally. So, why do you think it's important to practice reducing your emotional reactivity and distancing yourself from your thoughts, doing this whole diffusion, expansion exercise just regularly?
If you want to reduce your overall emotional reactivity, I kind of think about it in a way of like building healthy or healthier eating habits. I always see like online, It's better to just start like adding in healthier habits rather than like taking away habits or restricting. Kind of the question becomes, how do we increase our emotional regulation, which I know you've been
Yeah.
posting a lot lately.
Yes, I have. I'm like very, because I'm practicing it, right? Like so I see things and I'm like, oh, I should blast this out. Like this is something I'm practicing.
Mhm.
And I definitely want an upcoming episode to be all about habits and habit building. So this is a good leeway in.
A lot of people think that like being happy is normal, but it's actually not. It is actually
Yes.
healthy to feel like any and all of the emotion of our emotions. We learned somewhere along the way that sadness is bad and anger is bad. And as kids, a lot of us were like sent to timeout or spanked, or like when we have like these big emotions that we developmentally were unable to regulate.
I'm like,
Um,
I'm totally with you. And like, that's why this podcast has always been about celebrating the lows and the highs, because it's like both are so important. If we were happy all the time, we would never grow. We would stay the same people over the course of our lives. And imagine staying the same person you were at 21. Like, this world would be chaos. So
mhm.
I'm so with you. Like, and everyone's with you. The experts are with you. We cannot be happy all the time. In the best case scenario, you would get bored. In the worst case scenario, this world would be chaos because no one would ever grow.
And essentially, this is how do we regulate our emotions better as people? And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
this is why we're like seeing a huge shift to gentle parenting and
Mm-hmm.
having children learn how to regulate their emotions. Because, like, when you learn that at a young age, you're practicing it and growing with that. That's just huge. Like, you need to help your kids be able to like regulate their emotions because they can't. So these emotions are all healthy and normal to have. It's just a matter, like I said, of learning how to accept them
Mm-hmm.
and let them pass. I think somewhere it said like our emotions or a thought like lasts like 90 seconds, but I'm not sure where I read that. And
Mm.
I was like, wow, that seems like a short amount of time, but in my head it's like forever. Like especially when
Oh,
it's something I
yeah,
don't want.
absolutely.
So we essentially need to recognize that like psychological suffering is a natural human characteristic and it's
Mm-hmm.
a part of everyone's lives. In Russ Harris's book The Happiness Trap, he
Mm.
discusses a lot of what we're talking about today and how we need to learn to deal with all of our emotions. So to summarize, like there are 6 characteristics of ACT therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There is your observing self. That's the part of our mind that's able to be aware of what we are thinking or feeling in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's diffusion, uh,
Diffusion.
which is which is detaching yourself from a currently held thought, like we practiced. There is connection, which is connecting fully to what is happening to the here and now. That's like when we talked about like meditation, being present in the moment. There's expansion,
Expansion.
which is making the room for those feelings and sensations. And there are our values, which are the big picture of what we want in life and work and who we want to be. So, lastly, there's committed action, making sure that our actions are lining up with our values. And that is every therapy method is essentially like getting back to your values, what you want to happen and what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing and how that lines up. Like what are you doing? Is it actually leading you to like the life that you want?
That's a
So
really good perspective of therapy, is aligning your actions with your values and the life that you want. I haven't heard of it phrased that way before. But actually my meditation this morning was, you are what you do, not what you say you do. That's absolutely true. I've been recently, I write like an intention on my wall, and today's intention was always choose the loving option. So guiding every decision of the day with, what would the loving thing be to do right now? If someone absolutely pisses me off, just being like, you know what, they're probably hurting in some way too. Let me choose the loving option. But if I just say that, like, I'm not exuding love, like I'm just saying that I'm doing it. Today, I was walking to get coffee and some car turned in front of me in the pedestrian crosswalk and I had the right of way. And I was like, when I pass them, I'm going to glare into their window. And I did it because I'm a fallible human. And as soon as I did it, I was like, that was not the loving option.
mhm.
I did not do what I said I was going to do. therapy is just practicing doing that.
What I've been learning a lot is therapy is the client talking, and you're learning like about their values and what they want, and then you're helping them take that and learn about themselves. Because as a therapist, you're not just like giving advice. You're not
Mm-hmm.
saying, oh, you need to do this, because then your client will always need you. They need you to solve their problem. So like you are just getting them to realize what they want and what they value. And a lot of what I do in session with a client is reflecting what they're saying. Oh, it sounds like that's really important to you. And
Mm-hmm.
then they're like, yeah, that really is important to me. Or like, well, so you kind of just reflect what they're saying, and then it's like getting them to kind of realize their own thoughts. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's cool with therapy.
Yeah, totally. So what are you hoping to learn next through this journey?
I absolutely love attachment theory. And I think that your attachment style is extremely relevant when it comes to forming any type of relationship in your life, romantic, friendship, work, relationship. I've already learned like a little bit about each attachment style, but I hope to continue learning about attachment and incorporating it into my framework with certain clients. To summarize, there are 4 attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized.
Mm-hmm.
They are formed as a child through your bond with your primary caretaker, and can be shaped through life experiences and relationships as you grow. For example, I'm working towards an earned secure attachment coming from being an anxious attachment style. And secure attachment is essentially like the best one to have, the most emotionally regulated one. People with anxious attachment tend to cling on to feel safe and secure. So like cling to their partner and like get them to prove their love. And
Mm-hmm.
people with avoidant attachment feel safest when they push people away so they can avoid being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Disorganized attachment can be like a mixture of both anxious and avoidant, and can typically come from an abusive childhood. So it's like this attachment style happens when your sense of safety is also coming from a source of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But deep down, each attachment style wants to be loved. We all want to be loved. There's so much more to it. There's so much more to learn, and I'm just really excited to keep learning about it. But I just think it's such an important. Why don't we all know this? Why weren't we
Yeah.
taught this in school? Like, it's
Yeah, I feel
so.
like since Amir Levine and I forget who his partner's name was wrote Attached, I feel like it's gotten a lot more limelight, but I'm with you. I follow an Instagram account. I think it's literally called the secure, like at the secure attachment. And her page is my favorite page on Instagram. She literally writes out skits that's like how to not get caught into a negative cycle with your partner. And I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so guilty of doing these things. And it's just it's really interesting to see it play out.
I mean, I mentioned this too because like what we're talking about today is like I want to be happier. That's like a goal that everyone wants. I want to be
Yeah.
happier, and it's like I also want love. Like I want like a real, whether or not people are willing to admit that or like ready
Yeah.
to admit that that's where they are. But like everyone wants those things. Attachment style, I just feel, is so important because we are going to have relationships in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. So these last 3 questions I ask to every guest who comes on to We're Already Here. It is a constant from season 1. Let's get into it. This podcast is all about celebrating the lows just as much as the highs in your life. Can you tell me about a struggle in your life that sucked while you were going through it, but looking back now, you celebrate it? What did that struggle give you that you cherish today?
I mentioned like a little bit at the beginning, but I would say that my last breakup was really tough. It was a really tough one for me. I felt stuck and a bit unsafe in that relationship, and it was just a really bad situation. But I was really proud of myself for getting out and also putting in the work in therapy. After that, I put myself through therapy, and I knew I didn't want to repeat that pattern. I learned about a lot about what I wanted for my future through that relationship, as we all do with every relationship. And I sought out a partner whose values would align with mine. And I remember making a list of my top 10 non-negotiables in therapy. And I think in general, my way of getting through every breakup has been to focus like intensely and unapologetically on myself.
Hmm.
I think a big reason for that is because of my anxious attachment and tendency to be a people pleaser. I would just lose myself in relationships and focus so much on my partner's needs
Hmm.
and how to make them happy. And I would forget entirely about who I was and what would make me happy.
Hmm.
I don't have to do that with my fiance now. I can make him happy, and like I still like I do anticipate his needs, but I can do so without fully losing who I am.
Totally.
I feel extremely safe to be exactly who I am with him. So that's what we're all looking for, and
Yeah.
I would go through all of that again just to end up where I am now in life. And so I celebrate that point in my life because I
Hmm.
grew so much as a human. And for the first time in my life, I really feel I am happy and healthy and just truly
Yeah.
loved. And I'm thankful every day for
Aw.
such an amazing partner to share that with.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. And it's well documented. Like we will keep repeating the same patterns until we intentionally break them. So if we go through a breakup and we did not work to heal that breakup, but we just like worked on like moving past the pain and moving on, we're going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, even if it's with different people, absolutely different types of people. Like you will show up as the same person in every relationship. You will always be 50% of every relationship. So if like you're leaving a trail of relationships that didn't work, 50% of that is you.
That's why I feel like it's so important to learn about attachment. We call it the anxious avoidant dance. Most partners that I was dating, and it's like avoidant, 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 avoidant. As an anxious attachment style, we're just drawn to avoidant people, and it's like,
Hmm.
how does that even work? Because they're
Yeah.
pushing you away, you're clinging, and it's like that's not going to work. And I
Yeah.
finally was like, I'm done. I'm done with that, and I broke that pattern. And like you said, I was just really intentional about learning that about myself
Yeah.
and moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I probably skew anxious, but I have dated someone with an anxious attachment and avoided attachment and secure attachment, and none of those relationships worked. Yeah, it's not 100% my fault, but it's
Mhm.
never 100% any of my ex's faults, you know?
Mhm.
So it's
Someone
yeah,
on both of you.
you have to heal. You have to really reflect on a relationship after it's ended to see where you went wrong, what you can control, and
Mhm.
how you can show up better in your next one. And that's what I'm doing.
And just if anyone's curious, like where I found out attachment style was attachmentproject.com. They have a quiz where you can go on, and it's a lot of questions about your like relationship with your mom and your dad and your current or like last partner. Again, that's why it's just so important, is because as a child, our primary caretakers are really what shapes our attachment style. I think it's developed within our first 2 years as a kid. Yeah. But yeah, attachmentproject.com, definitely recommend to everyone that I talk about this with to just learn more about it. It's so important to every relationship that you're
Yeah,
in. It explains about who you are and why.
absolutely. So, how have you worked to change how you perceive the world around you? And how have you worked to change your thoughts and beliefs into ones that serve you and create a world that you want to live in?
I love, like, this is like what we were talking about today.
Absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know?
totally. Totally.
So I've definitely spoken a lot about this, but the work I did in my first semesters in graduate school helped change the way that I perceive and I look at things. Like I remember we did a lot of personality quizzes, like I said, inner child work, deep diving to get to know ourselves. I think I'm the type of human that loves reflecting and growing. So that helps to just be open and honest with yourself about what your faults are. And that's when you can truly grow.
Hmm. Hmm.
But being open and willing and becoming more psychologically flexible is definitely like the key to changing your perception of the world around you.
Yeah. And final question. Tell me the story that you've created for yourself.
In general, I have learned so much that the things that happen to you in your childhood shape you and affect the way that you are and the way that you think for the rest of your life. For example, I don't know, like I said, the exact moment I became a people pleaser, but I can tell you that I was bullied in middle school, and that definitely played into it and still carries into who I am today. I would say that my story is a lot about learning who I am and who I want to be and growth. One of my
Mm,
favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou, who said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Once you know better, do better."
mm,
And that really resonates with me because that's how I feel everyone should be. So rather than saying, "Oh, I'm just really blunt," or "Sorry, I have no filter,"
mhm.
and using that as an excuse to like say inappropriate comments,
Yeah.
instead of learning like you have this quality and it doesn't have to just stay that way. It can be worked on. You can grow. I think growth mindset is a huge recurring theme in my life. And I just truly look forward to helping others along the way discover who they are and how they want to grow as well.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Megan. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything that you want to plug or you want the viewers to check out? Like anything you're working on, you're interested in, anything like that?
Well, maybe one thing, if we have any like fiction reading fans out there, I do have like a book Instagram account. It's called Meg's Book Take, and it's just kind of like my take on books that I read, and I love reading. So
I love that.
on there, so I sometimes I post like about the nonfiction books that I'm reading, like The Happiness Trap or The Body Keeps the Score,
Mm,
different works that I'm like reading for learning like with my program and just on my own.
awesome. We will link it in the bio.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Megan. This was awesome.